the Minority Eye recently sat down with Nancy Barton, Executive Director of Sistercare, and board member Antjuan Seawright to talk about SC's recent domestic violence ranking by the Violence and Policy Center and Sistercare's mission of providing safety, services, and advocacy for women and their children. Well, Nancy and Antoine, thank you for sitting down with me today. I want to talk to you guys briefly about the upcoming October is Domestic Violence Month, and there's a lot of things going on in the news right now regarding domestic violence with the Ray Rice situation. Recently, the Violence and Policy Center released their findings, and South Carolina was ranked number 2 in the nation, I believe, for men domestic violence with men killing women. And Nancy, I want to focus this question to you. First of all, I guess if you can kind of tell us what's the role and the mission of Sistercare here in the Midlands?
We really work exclusively with survivors of domestic violence. All of them, but not all of them, are battered women. And we work with their children as well. And our work is about both services and safety, but it's also about advocacy and trying to help survivors of domestic violence work the systems, if it's court or law enforcement, prosecution. So we have a range of services, as you might expect. So we have a 24-hour day crisis line and emergency shelters, all of that to deal with crises, safety, critical sorts of issues. But then we work with the survivors and their children for longer periods of time in their homes, in the community, in what we call our community-based programs. So that's counseling and court advocacy. And then we have a long-term transitional housing program for families as well. But we do try to help them negotiate the criminal justice and the judicial systems through our advocacy efforts. And then always thinking about prevention, that next generation that's growing up in a violent home, how can we help break that cycle through early intervention? And of course, a lot of it is community education and awareness, like Minority Eye is helping with.
Okay. Are there any events planned for upcoming Domestic Violence Month? Does your organization have any events scheduled to bring awareness to the issue and the advocacy work that you guys are doing here in the Midlands?
Yes, we'll have a annual fundraiser that we also use for community awareness, and I can get you information about that in October. It's a musical event. We call it the Songbird Cafe, and then our mayor in the city of Columbia, Mayor Benjamin, has a Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I think the second Saturday, the 11th of October, and then our Attorney General for the state, Alan Wilson, has what's called a silent witness ceremony on the south side of the State House, and that's really memorializing and commemorating women and men who have fallen victim and are actually killed as a result of domestic violence.
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit about this recent report from the Violence Policy Center, specifically how we were ranked and what it entails?
So the Violence Policy Center out of Washington, D.C. for 17 years has gotten data from the FBI, their supplementary homicide rate, looking at women killed by men. And all 17 years, South Carolina is ranked in the top 9 states with the highest per capita rate, not number, but per capita rate of women killed by men. We just came off of being number 1, having the worst rate of any state in the United States. And now with the release of this report this week, we're ranked 2nd in the nation with 50 women who were killed as a result of domestic violence and at the hands of males. So we're really looking at almost 1 woman a week in South Carolina, and I often say frequently it's 1 mother, so that you have children that are affected by this homicide rate as well. One mother a week nearly killed at the hands of a man who so often is a former boyfriend, a former spouse, current intimate partner, in that kind of relationship.
Could you tell us, have your studies or your research, is there any, or what would you say are some of the contributing factors that make South Carolina rank so high on that list?
Well, I'd say that I think it's interesting when you look at the top 10 states with the highest rates, 6 of the 10 are southern states. So it's hard not to think about what's in the culture in the Southeast. And then typically the Southwest as well has had high rates. And we think it's complex. I'm not able to give you, one sentence and be quick about it. We think it's complicated when you look at this issue, but I think you do have to think about culture and traditions in South Carolina that, I'm generalizing, of course, but sometimes I think we hold on to our traditions and we're not real swift to change. And you really have to look at attitudes, I think, in the way people think about traditional kind of roles for males and females and head of household. The Post and Courier, as you were mentioning, had a 5-part series. In South Carolina that, I'm generalizing, of course, but sometimes I think we hold on to our traditions and we're not real swift to change. And you really have to look at attitudes, I think, in the way people think about traditional kind of roles for males and females and head of household. The Post and Courier, as you were mentioning, had a 5-part series about domestic homicide in South Carolina. They talked about really the role of religion and church. And of course we know so often faith is just absolutely an incredible support for folks, but I can't tell you how many battered women I've heard say they went to a pastor who said, "The Lord won't put more on you than you can handle. Please go back and pray about it more. Your role as the woman, the head of the family, is to keep that family together. You need to stay and try to make it work." Those sorts of comments, I don't mean to be critical, of course, about the role faith plays, but it was interesting that the Post and Courier in its research talked about traditions, about faith, and then when you really look at how the criminal justice system is responding, it's still not a progressive, sophisticated way. So sometimes we say we really think the courts and prosecution, law enforcement, is a hindrance and probably hurts as much as it helps in some instances. If we could just enforce some of the laws that we have, I think we might be seeing some progress. And then it's hard not to know about the role that guns play. If you're looking at the majority of South Carolina women being killed, not with hunting rifles or shotguns, but it's handguns. And the fact that there's been a federal law for years that disallows ownership or possessing or buying firearms if you're convicted of a misdemeanor criminal domestic violence charge or have an order of protection, which is kind of similar to a restraining order against a person. So it's complicated, of course.
Antjuan, you've definitely been a well-known spokesperson for Sistercare and domestic violence throughout the Midlands. I want to ask you, why did you feel it was important as a man to take a advocacy role in domestic violence and be an outspoken advocate to help try to stop domestic violence here in South Carolina?
Well, I think from my perspective, I am a son. Before anything, I'm a son of a mother. I have a sister and I have nieces. And so, in my opinion, if one young lady or one mother or one grandmother is impacted by domestic violence, then I'm impacted in some way. And so, instead of sitting back saying, what can we do, I took it on my part to step up and say, this is what we're going to do to help heal these problems. Because I think in some way, shape, or form, we're all impacted when one mother is killed, whether it's in South Carolina, whether it's in New Hampshire, wherever it is. If one mother's killed, then we're all impacted in some way, shape, or form.
Okay. You're also very heavily politically active. What are some of the political factors that you feel may contribute to South Carolina ranking so high on this list?
You know, it varies from, I guess, situation to situation, but one interesting thing is South Carolina is one of the only states in the country in terms of the number of elected men and women, the gender gap elected in the General Assembly. So, you know, that has to play some role in what laws are passed, what bills get held up in the legislative process. But, you know, I tell people when I go to a sister care board meeting and you know, we hear discussions about what goes on in our shelters. We don't ask questions of whether you're Democrat or Republican when they come into our shelter. We don't ask you what election cycle you voted in or what you didn't. We don't ask you who you voted for president. But what we do is try to offer services to make your life better and make your situation better. So when you leave our shelter, in some way, shape, or form, sister care has made a direct impact.
Okay. How South Carolina has been at the top of this list for many years. Your time in the state legislature, has the governor or the House legislators or senators did anything to try to curb this violence against women?
Well, there was a couple of years ago where there was a scenario where legislators, particularly in the Senate, actually put increased funding into DHEC and another entity's budget to help deal with, or at least help aid the problem of domestic violence. Not being political, because this is not a Democrat or Republican issue, this is a South Carolina issue. But the governor vetoed it. Not only did she veto the money for domestic violence, she vetoed money for rape crisis centers. And then she took to her Facebook page and her Twitter page in the same day saying, you know, explaining her veto, calling domestic violence funding and rape crisis center funding a special interest. And to me, that sends the wrong message, not just to the General Assembly, but that sends the wrong message across America, particularly when we're traditionally ranked in the top 5 among states with men killed by women.
Okay. Nancy, could you tell us a little bit about some of the, if a woman was in need of help and was going through, had a situation where she was exposed to domestic violence, what are some of the services that she could call to get help with, or a family member that knew this was going on? How would they first interact with your agency?
Sure. I would like to give our crisis line number, if you would be willing to post that, because that's so important, 765-9428. So it's a 24-hour-a-day service number. And what we find so often is that survivors and victims hear about sister care from other survivors and victims, and of course law enforcement. So referrals sometimes from counselors, law enforcement friends, and sometimes the faith community and medical community. So we'll see typically a battered woman calling our service line, and so often she needs help with long-term housing and in court. And if she's in danger, then we have 3 emergency shelters, and we try to do a quick assessment over the phone to look at dangerousness, imminent danger, lethality, and service needs, and then we try to feed her into whatever sister care service may be most appropriate. But always if there's imminent danger, we look toward our shelters. Now, to be honest, there are times that we simply do not have bed space. We turn women away throughout the year because the demand is beyond what we really can handle, and we try to find another temporary safe space for them. But I realize nonprofits always talk about the need for money, but I mean, the more funding we can receive, the more the state legislature would consider additional funding, the better able we are to serve and not be turning individuals away. But in addition, we provide counseling for the survivors and then counseling for the children. We'll accompany them to court, and we have a family court attorney that can help with orders of protection and sometimes with divorce and child support and child custody issues. So we try to provide a full range, including long-term housing through our transitional housing program, but we really can only help about 40, 45 families in those houses. So it's not as though we've got hundreds and hundreds, and the need is so great for affordable and accessible housing.
About how many women do you think your organization, or can you estimate your organization helps throughout the year on a yearly basis?
We serve a little over 7,000 women and children. That was last year, 2013's number. And so that's in 5 counties. So we're in Kershaw and Fairfield and Newberry, as well as Richland and Lexington counties, and here in Columbia. But so many of those women we're seeing in court. So for example, Lexington County Criminal Domestic Violence Court holds a court once a week, and we may see 10 to 14 or so women in court that day, and there are days when we may see 30. I mean, it's just really a great number.
Antjuan, as a board member, is there anything that the average citizens can do to help other, if they're not able to just give money? How could we go about helping board members help this organization?
Well, we can step up to the plate as a start. You don't have to be a board member of any organization to make a difference. You can carry the banner or carry the Sistercare flag wherever you go, whether that's raise awareness, whether it's starting within your own household, teaching your sons and your daughters, teaching your sons primarily, for every man who may be watching this interview, teaching your son it's not okay to put your hands on a woman. It's just not the right thing to do. Whether you're black, white, rich, or poor, no matter your political affiliation, that's just not the right thing to do. I mean, that's where it starts. It starts in the home. And for us, for many of us, that also translates to our churches. Our pastors and our leaders, our faith leaders, we got to tell our men and our women, we got to tell our women, it's not okay for a man to put their hands on you and you go back and you call that love. That's not true love. And we got to tell our men, our deacons, our men's ministry, our young leaders, we got to tell them that's not okay. So I believe it starts in the home. And of course, financial support is a big component, a big asset to what we do, because the more money we receive, whether it's a donation, whether it's an in-kind contribution, the more services we can provide, and we cannot turn away women and children who come to our shelters.
So Nancy, before we go, could you give us that crisis number again and your contact information in case somebody wanted to contact you directly?
Certainly. Our 24-hour-day crisis or service line is 803-765-9428, and my number is 803-926-05.
What's the Sistercare's website?
Easy to remember, sistercare.com.
All right. Nancy, Antjuan, thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
Thank you to Minority Eye for taking this serious issue seriously.